Okay, well, then let's move on to the next session. I was asked to speak a little bit about the environmental impact of the plastics, but as we are going to come back to it in the afternoon, I will make this part short and I will focus more on the mitigation actions of this environmental impact. So environmental impact of plastics is clearly plastics pollution. This is a picture I took myself in Antananarivo in Madagascar last year. And you see, I think in this picture, what is the main problem, which is concerned with plastics in the environment. So the major concern is obviously plastics pollution. So why does this come from? So now we had a very nice lecture showing us that packaging and plastics are very magnificent and useful materials which are used in a lot of different applications we have, and virtually today we cannot live our everyday life without the help of synthetic materials. So they are all around us, and food packaging is part of this major use of plastics. So as Horst Christian Langowski was also showing us, is that food packaging and the environment for food packaging has two different types of impact. So he was giving us this very nice demonstration. So there is the direct environmental impact of the packaging you saw, which is mainly caused by the fabrication of the packaging itself, and then its impact in the end of life, especially impact due to dissemination to nature. And then there is also indirect environmental impacts of the food packaging, which are caused by the loss of food. So it is indirect, not good packed food can be lost, and so you have the impact is then linked to the food. There are also indirect impacts which are an influence of the transport efficiency of the food in the supply chain, and it can also impact the consumer behavior, and then it is affecting transport, storage, and preparation in households. So when we want to go to mitigating the environmental impact, we need always to think about both parts, the direct and the indirect impacts of the packaging. What concerns the direct impact, I always liked this figure, which comes from Richard Thompson, who was one of the first popularizing the problem of plastics pollution in the environment. And his initial article was already published in 2009. So for specialists as I am, since 2000 already we knew that there was a problem with plastics in the environment, but it took almost 15 years that it came to the general public, this type of problematics. So what he did in 2009 already, he took this curve here, which is the exponential growth curve of the plastics production, worldwide plastics production, and it is quite okay. It was in 2009, but when we compare it to actual data, his prediction is right. And then what we see is that plastics were invented and first produced in the 1940s, which is not that long time ago. And then we had an industrialization, very quick industrialization of the plastics production. And already in the 2006, in the 1960s, which is just 20 years, not even 20 years after the first invention, first polymerization of widely used plastics today, we had the first alerts on accumulation in natural habitats. Those first alerts were issued by the environmental organizations Greenpeace and the WWF, which are the ancient and most historical ones. And so already in 1960, there was clear that there may be a problem somewhere. However, we did basically nothing about this problem. Then they were already concerned for wildlife. And then what is also very interesting in this curve is that in the 1980s, we had the first concerns for human health. These concerns for human health within only 10 years issued a legislation. And this legislation is also something which is going to be taught to you, which shows also that when we have a concern for human health, society is able to react quite quickly, whereas when you have a concern for wildlife, society is not reacting with the same kinetics, which is, I think, one of the most important issues we are facing today. So NGOs are telling us that we have now plastics everywhere in the human body, disseminated in all of nature. So this is one of the effects of this not reacting for 80 years, for 60 years, let's say. And there is also other issues, which are the health issues caused by potentially toxic molecules which are coming together with plastics use. So yes, I was telling him he had his curve. So this is the real curve because the other one was a projected curve. So what you can see is that indeed plastics growth is uninterrupted or only interrupted by major global crisis, because it is something which is directly correlated to the worldwide economic growth. So what we see is the last interruption was in 2020 because of the COVID crisis, but then a growth started up again. And what you can also see is that all these different measures, for the moment, we cannot see anything in the growth curve. So all the mitigation measures which we are taking up to now did not impact a lot of on the growth curve. What is also interesting to know is that this growth curve is corresponding to approximately 4.5% of the global CO2 emissions in 2020, so for the plastics production, which means that CO2 is not the first problem. It is a problem because 4.5% is still a lot, but it is not the first problem of plastics pollution. The first problem comes from the fact that we have a very durable goods, but they are used only for a small time, which means that there is a kinetic imbalance between the duration of the objects we're using and the time of service. And this is especially true for packaging. The time of service is under 1 year often. Horst Christian was already starting to speak about it. So one of the mitigation things could be the recycling. So when we look here on the most used plastic types we can see that a low density polyethylene is one of the major produced resins, and it is usually not recyclable. Okay. Then we have polypropylenes and polypropylene fibers. There you have sometimes recycling. And then we have two type of plastics which are quite well recycled. PET, polyethylene terephthalate, which makes up your plastic bottles, and also high density polyethylene, which is also most bottles and containers, things like this. And then you have the polystyrenes, for example, which are usually not recycled, although there are some measures now trying to come to include a recycling stream here. So overall, what you see is that when you think about your mitigation measures, those two polymers are often a very good idea to be used. This was just a figure for the people for general overview. So roughly 40% of all the plastics are used in packaging. That's why this kinetic imbalance is a problem of us. And in packaging, you have only 7 major resins which are used. This is also showing you that we are on a very highly concentrated market with only a few references in this sector. And so when you want to come up with a new plastic, this means that you need to penetrate a market which is of high concentration. And this is very, very complicated to do. That's also why you do not see that much innovation in the polymer resins on the shelves. Okay. Horst Christian was already showing it. So there was a a lot of comptabilization work showing where the plastics came from. So all the plastics produced, where all the plastics went until now. This was done in 2015, which shows us that, well, the major part of the plastics goes straight to the landfill or is discarded. And this is making up our plastics pollution problem. And that the recycling streams are rather small, and closed loop recycling is a very, very tiny fraction of the plastics fate today. So when it goes out, it goes obviously out in the nature. So where does it go? This is a world map of the UN environmental program, and it is showing you the hotspots of plastics pollution all over the planet, and almost all the plastics in the sea comes from the land, obviously. It is 80% roughly from the land, where you have 50% from the rivers, and there is approximately 1,000 rivers which intake nearly 80% of the global plastics pollution inside the sea. And then you have 30% of direct import runoff, so the wind blowing plastics inside the water. And then, which is also not neglectable, is 20% coming from the marine transport. This is why you can find not used plastic pellets in the seawater. So these plastics were lost in the global shipping, and they even were not used once before they became waste. So this may then, because also the UN put this over Europe. So I wanted just to focus a little bit on Europe. So the Mediterranean Sea is the most polluted sea worldwide. And I'm using here this cartography of Ocean just because I'm very proud to say that some of those points are coming from AgroParisTech and were measured by myself. So especially over here. And this is not all what Ocean is doing. So they have, I just focused on the part where AgroParisTech is having an input in the measurement. What you can see here, this is hotspots of plastics pollution in the Mediterranean Sea. And this is the modeled plastics pollution in the Mediterranean Sea. And it's quite well coinciding. It comes from the fact that you have the plastics pollutions coming in from the rivers, like here in the north of Italy, for example, the Po. So this is a very big river, and it takes in the plastics pollution. And when you see the measurements of the Ocean, those are hotspots of pollution. So just to focus and say that, well, the Mediterranean Sea is a very, very polluted sea. Okay. So Europe was reacting on this. In fact, they were comptabilizing the output of microplastics to nature, so what they are coming from, but we are going to go into this a little bit deeper in the afternoon. You have a primary output of non-intentionally microplastics, which is 176,000 tons a year. And they come, for example, from the granular infill materials in artificial turf. So I don't know, sports places, things like this. There is a big output on microplastics to nature. And then what they also were recognizing is that you have a very large part of primary and intentionally added microplastics, which are microplastics added, for example, to cosmetic products. And they could be potentially avoided because it is intentionally added microplastics. And that's why the European Commission adopted a restriction on the 25th September of last year. So it's not very long ago, on intentionally added microplastics. And now they need to go there in an annex of the REACH regulation. And so you need now to prove that when you are adding intentionally microplastics to a product, that they are safe for the environment. So this is a quite new regulation, and you have some restriction actions here now. Okay. So this being said, the global mitigation strategies are to go from a linear to circular economy and to ban single-use plastics. The linear economy is defined with this scheme here. You have a resource extraction, and then your materials goes right the way through in a linear manner until its disposal. And you need to note in this graph that just because you have incineration with energy production, this is not a circular economy. It is still a linear economy, take, make, and waste. The circular economy then wants to change this paradigm. So you have still this going through from the energy and material input until the waste emission, but you will wants to close the loop of the material inside, to have the material longer in use. So the smaller the loop is, the better it would be. This is the paradigm. So there is the reuse things. I don't know when you have this is something which is very easily done for very, very expensive things of the households. So the second expensive thing of a household after the flat you're buying in your life or the house you're buying in your life is normally your car. So there is a huge occasion market. So reusing cars, this is quite normal because it is very expensive. So one of the challenges is to make the same thing with things which are not expensive. So buying, selling a car, a secondary hand car is easy. Doing it for hair dryer is less easy. Okay. Then when you cannot do is still the cars are showing us that you can manufacture and refurbish. So cars, you have spare parts. Spare parts can come from old cars. So this is things we will need to do now for items which have not the same economic value. And then when this is not possible, there is recycling, which can be used. So the idea is to go from take, make, waste to reduce, reuse, recycle, and recover, to go from a short-term profitability to a long-term sustainability, to go from measures to minimize the environmental impact of the item one is using to a maximization of the environmental benefits and the resource values, and to step away from just a product-centered approach to a service-oriented approach in the circular economy. This would then have several advantages in less carbon dioxide emissions, less material consumption, and increasing land productivity and soil health, especially when you are able to either less waste food in the value chain or recover the nutrients which are in the food value chain and bring them back to the soil. Okay. So in that case, food packaging would come from the status of a waste to the status of a resource, and recycling was something which was favored, and it is the part of recycling of plastics is continuously growing now. Okay. In order to go there, there is several regulation and standards, and those here are just the number of the different regulations for the packaging, which are concerning the processes, the material, and the labels, which are in force today. And you're going to have some specific things, for example, on the regulation of the recycling afterwards in the afternoon. There is also something which is very significant, is that there is existing an intergovernmental negotiation committee on plastics pollution from the UN. So it started in December 2020, which means that the plastics have their own COP. Like the CO2, so global warming, there is also a COP on plastics now. The objective of this negotiation is to come up with a legally binding treaty, worldwide treaty, promoting reduction, reuse, refill, repair, repurposing, and refurbishing of plastic articles in line with the circular economy paradigm, to promote alternative plastics and alternative to plastics foods, and to prevent the emission of the microplastics. As those negotiations are very long, this is all just for the moment in the upcoming, let's say. There is nothing done yet, because they already needed 1 year to be clear about the agenda of those COPs. Okay. So in Europe, Europe is going forward. So there was already a directive on plastics waste, which was installing this European hierarchy on waste treatment, where the first thing should be to prevent the waste, because we are all okay to say that the best waste we have is the one which was never produced. When it cannot be prevented, it was already here that we should prepare for a reuse. When we cannot do, we should recycle. If not possible, recover for incineration with energy recovery, for example. And if everything fails, then dispose it in a landfill. So I'm going to be a little bit, oh, what's happening? I just wanted to go a little bit deeper in, I don't know what's happened, sorry, in the recycling problematics. So most of the materials we're using are virtually recyclable. This is why you have this thing here, and you have always the numbers which were associated to the different types of materials. In the case of plastics, you have the numbers 1 to 19. When this is just for you, that you know, because it's interesting to know which one. So, for example, polyethylene terephthalate would be number 1. Okay, and new plastics like polylactide, they are in the number 7, because number 7 is others, is all the ones which are in niche markets. Okay, there is a difference between recyclable and recycled, and this is something just to remind you. So all those plastics, you will see, because they are thermoplastics, in absolute, they are recyclable, because you can put them inside an extruder and do a new object out of them. However, in order to be really recycled, there is need of other things. This means that only this technical property is not sufficient. You must have a sorting and collection system. Then you must have a collection system. Then you must have a sorting system, which is sorting out the different plastics in their recycling streams. And then you must have a process which can recycle and decontaminate. And then there must be also a secondary market for the recycled material. And only if those 4 points are there, then plastic comes from the virtual or the technical property of being recyclable to a plastic which is in reality recycled. And there is a big step between both of them. Another thing also important still to have in mind, that we have 2 different types of recycling. Both types are of value and are done. There is closed loop recycling, which means that the PET bottle you are putting in your waste container is going to be a PET bottle again. This is called closed loop recycling. So you make an item and you come back to the same type of item. But there is also the possibility to have an open loop recycling. In that case, the PET bottle is going to be textile fibers, for example, or printer polycarbonate bottles going printer components. So this is another type of recycling. It is also of environmental value, but it has not the same constraints. We're going to speak about this later, I think. Okay. So what is in force for the moment in the in the EU? Sorry. So there is still the directive of packaging and packaging waste, which is in force. However, this is going to be a regulation, and I'm going to speak about afterwards, because I think it's going to cancel out its force within the next year. Then there is the directive on single-use plastics, and then there is also the regulation on the recycled plastics. So I'm going to focus here and just have a few words on the SUP. The SUP directive was of 2019 was a very important step forwards to mitigating plastics pollution, I think, of the European community. Its objective was to reduce the plastics waste and to promote the shift towards the circular economy, as I was defining to you. The targets was to ban certain single-use plastic items, which are cotton buds, straws, cutlery, by July 2021. And so all those types of items here you saw banned now in your everyday life. So well, you should know that this was not because suddenly, I don't know, that the restaurant of your choice became environmentally very ambitious. It was because there was a regulation behind, okay? And this is something which is quite, I think, important to note. And so now all those bans, they are done here, and we are now in the moment where we should look on the separate collection requirements, the consumption, and the different reduction measures. So there are two different objectives. There is an objective for the separate collection of plastic items. So 77% of plastic bottles for recycling, but for recycling, not recycled. This is a collection target by 2025. Next year, in the whole Europe, when you saw the figures of Host Christian, you see that maybe there is also something somewhere far off still. And then the other collection target would be 90% by 2029. And then there is also, in order to get the market flowing and to have a business for recycled plastics, there are recycled content targets inside the new items which are on the market. And there is inclusion of at least 25% of recycled plastics by 2025. So next year, normally, this should be in every bottle you have, and this should increase to 30% by 2030. So this is the objectives of the SUP, of the European directive. And then there is now something even stronger coming up. This is the new packaging and packaging waste regulation, which is going to replace the directive, which is still in force today. And this is a new regulation. So Europe was stepping forward from a directive to a regulation in order to have all the member states on the same level. This regulation was adopted by the political agreement in the European Parliament in April this year. As you know, in the 9th of June, so in 2 weeks, we are going to vote for a new European Parliament, and then the final adoption of the text, because for the moment it is adopted with the procedure which is called congendium, because all the translations in the different official languages of the member states are not finished, and this is something which is going to be finished, they think, until September or October, and then the final text will be adopted by the new parliament, and it should be published by the end of the year or starting next year, and so coming into force by 2026. What is inside these new regulations? There is, I was choosing, I'm not going through all of it. There is a large part given to the substances of concern. Well, it is, as I'm not jurist in the beginning, so there is a specific measure for the substances of concern. So all substances which can have a toxicological effect and could be in the packaging plastics, they are normally regulated by REACH. Okay, then you have substances of concern, they should come and you have your potential restrictions by REACH. However, in order to go faster and to have a little bit of freedom, there was a measure adopted that in case that those substances are going to impact reuse or recycling targets, they can be regulated inside the new PPWR regulation. So there is a possibility to have provisions on substances of concern which are coming out of the PPWR and not out of REACH. And one of the major molecules which is targeted for the moment are the PFAS, so the polyfluorinated substances. And here you have specific inclusion targets and measurements which are now enforced in those regulations. So which means that we will need to get rid of the PFAS in plastics packaging soon, because 18 months after the entry in force, so when the entry in force is 2026, it is quite for tomorrow also to get rid of the PFAS. Then there are the new objectives of the recyclability. So all packagings must be recyclable from the entry into force of the PPWR. So with definition, the plastic is recyclable. And now I want you to remember that here we are on recyclable and not recycled yet. Okay, so it was designed in compliance with category-specific design criteria, which are going to be published by this regulation. They are able to be recycled in such a way that the resulting material is of sufficient quality to replace a primary raw material. And when it becomes waste, the object is collected separately, sorted into specific streams without affecting the recyclability of other large-scale recycled waste streams. Items are classified, packaging items are classified into 3 different types of categories for their recyclability, potential recyclability. So A over 95% of the whole object, so which means the bottle plus its closures plus its labels, for example, more than 80% and more than 70%. This is the category C is apparently the category which has the least recyclability, and it is the one which is going to be interdicted by prohibited by 2028. So they are now categorized, and then there are targets. There are scaled recycling targets for each category one needs to reach by 2035. And then there are other scaled targets to be reached by 2020 and 38. Okay, so 2025, you are pushing up the recycling objectives, and by 2028, the category C is not going to exist anymore. Okay. There are some exceptions here. It is packaging for infant formula, transport of dangerous goods, and made of lightweight wood, cork, textile, fiber, ceramic, porcelain, wax. So some exceptions. And to go there is by the mid-2030s, eco-taxes will be modulated as a function on in which recycling category your packaging is going to fall in, which means this is going to be more expensive than this. Then this is for the sorting collection, and then there is the provisions for the incorporation of recycled materials. So when we are looking on PET food packaging, there should be 30% by 2030 and 50% by 2040. Plastics food packaging, except, sorry for the error here, PET and bottles, it's 10% by 2030 and then 50%. And then for the bottles, we have specific measures. So the PET bottles is 30% in a few years, and then it's going up to 65% of recycled material inside the item. Okay, when we go up to this kind of percentage, there is a technological challenge, and there is also a challenge to have enough raw materials, recycled raw materials on the market. There is also exceptions, compostable packaging, still the packaging for transport of dangerous goods, for infant foods, and packaging which is not in compliance with the regulations of food contact materials, and any part of packaging which is representing less than 5% in mass of the total item. Specific provisions for bio-based plastic materials. So 3 years after the entry in force, the Commission may present a legislative proposal in order to establish the sustainability for bio-based material criteria, set incorporation targets, if needed, of those material into new items, and introduce the possibility of achieving the incorporation target of recycled plastics through bio-based plastics, which means that you could have the possibility, when you need to go up to 65%, that you, I don't know, nobody knows yet, or 10% of the 65% could be done by a bio-based PET and not by a recycled one. Also for the compostability, because there are some measures that require packagings which are intimately mixed with the food to be biodegradable and compostable. So the member states may require that those things like tea bags, coffee capsules, and other beverage sachets, which can be intended to be used and disposed together with the product and should be compostable. This is something which is also in force already in France today. And then there is also measures on reducing packaging sizes, on minimal packaging sizes, and also on looking for lost spaces, for example, in transport. The second big part is the reuse objectives. So what you need to have in mind is that the reuse objectives are not only for the B2C packagings, but also the B2B packagings, and it is including the transport packaging. And so not only the sales, but also the transport packaging. So the objectives are for beverages, which is the first sector which can be also concerned with deposit refill systems. There is an obligation on the final B2C for a distributor to have 10% of the items for the moment. In France, at least, there is a big discussion if this should be items or mass. For the moment, it is 10% of items. They should be reusable by 2030, and for 2040 there are targets, but those are aspirational targets, so they are not enforced yet. So we need to tend there, but this is the target one should reach in a very few years of time. Here are also exceptions. The highly perishable beverages, milk and dairy products, and wines and spirits are exempt. Same thing for boxes, except cardboard, 10%, and then for 2025, 25%. And then for transport and intra-sales, packaging, pallets, crates, bulk containers, 40%. EU inter-sales packagings, this is not a small objective, 40%. And this is also why I draw your attention on the transport sector and the secondary packaging in the transport. There are very, very big targets there, okay? Still with these exceptions. And when you are a food supplier having different sites, by the coming entry into force of the PPWR, 100% of your transport packaging used between your own sites needs to be reusable. So you have 2 years of time to bring this up in your own internal logistics cycles, okay? And well, you see, you have still the same exceptions for the dangerous goods and flexible packaging for used for transport of foodstuffs and ingredients. Okay. There is a possibility to come out of this reusability objectives. So there can be an exception which can be given only for a period of 5 years to a member state when the member state is showing that he was already fulfilling the and overpassing the recycling targets of the packaging waste. By 5%, then there can be an exemption on the reuse objectives. When the member state is on track to achieve these waste prevention objectives, and when economic operators have adopted a business plan for the waste prevention and recycling that contributes to achieving the waste prevention objectives. So there is possibilities to come out, which is, we think, maybe there's going to be 2 strategies as a function of member states and economic operators. Either you can also maybe force all you have to the recycling in order to be then exempt for the reuse. So there can be 2 strategies. Either you go for the reuse or you massively go for recycling. I think go for reuse would be the better option, but this is a personal opinion. Okay, in France, there is already the law AGEC, donc the anti-waste law in force, and it is compliant. So what you need already to do in France for the waste regulation, this is going to be in line with the European regulation. So any investment which was done in France already is okay, is on the right track. So here you have the extended use producer responsibility, the single-use plastics ban which was implemented, the waste reduction target, the deposit return schemes, which are hardly and thoroughly discussed for the moment, also with the communities, the extended warranty and the promotion of reuse. This was already in the French law. Just 2 last words, because I'm 2 minutes over time. What is the extended producer responsibility? This is apparently one of the major means of the European regulation to reach its targets. Is going to go over this. So this implies that the economic actors are responsible for the entire life cycle of the products they place on the market, from the eco-design to the end-of-life management. So as a producer, you are in charge of the end-of-life management, and then you have 2 possibilities in order to raise to your challenge. Either you try to do something on yourself, or what is often done is that the producers establish non-profit collective structures, which are called eco-organisms, which are in charge of developing the specific collection and recycling systems together with the municipalities who are the operators on the ground, or which are making things happen. So this is what is normally done. And in France, there are, for the ESR of the packaging waste of the households, there is CTO and LECO, so 2 well-known names in France, and those are this type of eco-organizations which are collecting money and then organizing the collection on together with the communities, with the municipalities. Okay, so to be approved, those eco-organizations needs to be improved, and by the authorities, and the improvement of the specifications include then the objectives for eco-design, collection, recycling, and when relevant, reuse and repair. So today, when you are a producer and you are adhering to an eco-organism, this is the one who is going to help you also with those targets, those eco-design targets and reuse targets, because this is his job. So this is his role. So what he's going to do is that you are putting something on the market, you are paying a contribution to this eco-organism, and he's then going to be in charge to provide the financial support to the contracting entities for the waste management, which are the local authorities, association, private organization, and they are then the waste collectors. They are going to take the packaging, bring it to the recycling, and then it can start all over again. Okay, this is the role of the eco organization, and this is what we are paying for when we are paying this eco contribution. Okay, so in France, they are champions because they started off very early with the first EPR sectors already in the 1990s, and now we are going to have progressively 24 different EPRs. This is not a very easy thing. So, but what you see for the packaging here, you have the household packaging, and what is now coming into what came into force in 2024. It is restaurant packaging, and next year it is going to there's going to be an EPR on industrial and commercial packaging. Okay, so when you are now a producer, you not only need to care for the household packaging. When you are selling things, you're food producer and you're selling also to restaurants, you have a second one. And you have a third one for your internal transport packaging, and the transport packaging you have to your client. Okay, so this is quite complicated. Speak with your eco-organisms. They can help you with this. Okay, so with this, I've finished. Thank you for your attention.